This is not a normal photo collection. Behind the 3 snapshots that I'm going to be showing you today are haunting stories, moments frozen in time that capture the calm just before, or strangely enough, after disaster struck. From a normal looking photo, which actually hards a very dark secret, to an unsettling message discovered deep within a national park, these photos are just about the last thing you'd ever want to have on your camera roll. And as if that wasn't bad enough, they're all 100% real. No BS here, folks. Real life can be horrifying, and sometimes this horror gets captured on camera. So with that said, let's take a virtual trip right now to the mountains outside of Santa Barbara, California. This trip I'm taking you on is totally free, but you must hit that subscribe button to cover your admission, especially if you're a repeat viewer. Our goal is to get to 1 million subscribers, and so if you could help us out, double check that if you're subscribed, if you think you are, because weird things happen sometimes. Please help us get to our goal of 1 million subscribers. And okay, let's get into it. In March of 2018, a tired and weary group of 3 returned from a hike on the Cold Springs Trail. I say that they're tired for a very specific reason. Their exhaustion wasn't just related to the miles they'd hiked that day or the elevation that they'd gained. The emotional exhaustion from what they had just experienced on this particular day, well, that weighed on them far more than the exhaustion they felt from the actual hike. In an effort to de-stress, they tossed back a few beers and then they took a look at the photos they had taken that day. And when they did this, what they saw in this photo right here chilled them to the bone. The day before, 2 different hikers, Sailor Gilliams and Brendan Vega, had set out on that very same trail, but quickly found themselves in over their heads. They were both 22 years old and they were not experienced hikers. And that's not to say that you have to be an expert hiker to hike the Cold Springs Trail, but it is clear from this situation that these 2 hikers were not prepared for the terrain. Sailor and Brendan were only planning on being out for a few short hours. And because of this, they didn't bring a simple yet often life-saving piece of equipment that I always encourage everyone to carry on the trail every single time you go hiking. I'm talking about a headlamp. And don't get me wrong, I get it. If you're not planning on night hiking, if you're only planning on being out for like a short hike or something, it makes sense to neglect to bring a headlamp. But here's the problem, and it's quite obvious, to be honest with you. If your hike takes even just a little bit longer than you expected, and then the sun suddenly dips below the horizon, that missing light source can and will leave you completely and utterly screwed. This is exactly what happened to Sailor and Brendan. As darkness crept over them, they found themselves stumbling through the wilderness with only their cell phone flashlights to guide the way. And I guess your cell phone light is better than nothing, but it's not the same as a headlamp. It's not even close. This was an already terrifying situation that these 2 hikers found themselves in. But what they didn't realize is that they were on the verge of something far, far worse. With every step that they took, Sailor and Brendan unknowingly ventured deeper into an absolute nightmare, one they couldn't possibly escape in the pitch black wilderness. So with that said, things are obviously about to get very dark. I don't just mean from the lack of light, but the story's about to get bad. And before we get there, I just want you to take a deep breath and allow me to lighten the mood for just a quick moment and tell you about Groons. Folks, I've got some fantastic news. Thanks to this video's sponsor, Groons, you can now eat gummy bears and not feel bad about it. Groons is dedicated to bringing comprehensive and real nutrition to you through their gummies, which are formulated from 60 nutrient-dense and whole food ingredients. But wait, hold up for a second. I can literally see your eyes glazing over as I said that. Well, actually, maybe the gummy bear thing got your attention, but you've probably seen a million ads for different nutritional products, and so I'm here to tell you that Groons is different than all of those, and here's why. If you've ever looked at various multivitamin or like other greens nutrition facts, you've probably noticed from all of these products that they all have daily values of well over 100% for certain minerals. And I don't want to scare you, but that isn't always the healthiest thing. Like, have you seen some of these that have like 300+% of your daily value for some things? And honestly, that is mostly born out of laziness from these supplement companies. But Grüns is different. They make it a point to contain 100% of your daily needs for safe vitamins and only 25% of your daily needs for certain minerals that are known to be potentially toxic if you have them at excessive levels over an extended period of exposure. Folks, this is huge, and it's honestly something that I never even noticed until I discovered Grüns. Grüns' gummies are vegan, they're gluten-free and dairy-free, and they contain 6 times the gut health ingredients compared to the leading greens powders, which is amazing because we all know the saying, happy gut, happy butt. They told me not to say that, so don't quote me on that, but you can quote me on this. Grüns actually just rebranded, and I love that their new packaging is now as fun on the outside as their tasty gummy bears are on the inside. Folks, you gotta try Grüns. They are not just another vitamin, and oh, by the way, you're gonna get up to 45% off by clicking the link in the description of this video. You'll also be doing this channel a massive favor, by the way, so please click that link. Do it right now. Do it. Okay, back to the video. So Sailor and Brendan are stumbling around in the nighttime woods, and once again, they don't have a headlamp or a flashlight. They only have their phone lights, which is not very good. So they're stumbling around in the dark like this, and then all of a sudden, their situation went from very bad to much, much worse in just the blink of an eye. Their cell phone batteries ran dry, cutting off their only light sources and leaving them to find their way back to the trailhead in total darkness. And then, in a moment that changed everything, Sailor made a leap down from a rock, but the landing went horribly wrong, resulting in a fracture of her left leg. So all of a sudden, she's now just completely immobilized. And obviously, the only thing to do was for Brendan to try and pull off the impossible, which was to carry Sailor to safety in the dead of the night with no reliable light source. This was obviously a very daunting task, to put it mildly, but Brendan, this dude wasn't gonna give up. And so with honestly heroic resolve, he lifted Sailor onto his back and he started inching his way through the dense, pitch black woods, hoping that he was headed in the direction of their car, hoping he was headed to safety. Again, this was absolutely heroic, but I'm just gonna be blunt, it didn't work. Unfortunately, fate just wasn't finished with these two hikers yet. And so not long after lifting Sailor and trying to hike out, Brendan tripped and he crashed to the ground, completely shattering his elbow. Sailor tumbled from his back when this happened, obviously, and this added a broken ankle to her already serious injuries. And so in this moment, they kind of have to pause and just like take stock of what's going around them. And this is when the grim reality set in. They had no choice but for Brendan to leave Sailor behind completely alone in the darkness by herself and for him to go get help. That's a super scary, I mean, can you imagine leaving somebody injured in the pitch black woods like this? I mean, it's just terrible, but yeah, it's the only choice they had. And so Brendan walked away, and neither one of these two realized it at the time, but as Brendan walked away, that would be the last time that they would ever see each other. So Brendan continued on, but there was another major problem at hand. During his fall, Brendan's glasses had been smashed to pieces, which obviously rendered them completely useless. So now, he was trying to make his way out of the nighttime woods without a light source once again, and without being able to see clearly. This, again, heroic but desperate journey would soon end in total heartbreak as Brendan Vega would end up succumbing to the darkness, and Sailor waited in terror, unaware of the tragedy that had just unfolded. At some point during his struggle to find the car, Brendan fell about 30 feet, tumbling down a rocky ledge and was tragically killed. Around 10:30 the next morning, his body was discovered by some other hikers laying only about 15 feet off the trail. But as search and rescue worked to bring his body out of the wilderness, Sailor remained in the woods, completely unable to move and honestly unable to do anything other than scream for help. But eventually she became so weak that she wasn't even really able to do that. That very same afternoon, so this is, the day after Brendan and Sailor went into the woods, the three group of hikers who I mentioned at the beginning of this story set off on the Cold Springs Trail, completely unaware of the nightmare that lay ahead. By around 4 p.m., they actually wandered slightly off the main path and started scaling some rock walls beneath a waterfall. Like most people do when they go hiking, they snapped a few quick photos, without even glancing at the images before slipping the phone back into a pocket. They had no idea that hidden in those photos, something just straight up disturbing had been captured, something that would turn their adventure into a tale of horror that they would never forget. After taking these photos, one of the hikers, who was named Nicole, noticed something that seemed out of place. Again, they didn't look at the photos, that would come later. Just while they were climbing, while they were hiking, she noticed in the forest below them a, quote, flame of red hair. She sees this and she's looking at it, and at first it's just kind of stationary, it's not moving, but that wouldn't last. Eventually, Nicole saw this red hair move, and when this happened, a chill ran through her because she realized that something was obviously very wrong. With her heart pounding, Nicole led the group down towards this mysterious site, and when they did this, they found her. They found Sailor. They found her sprawled out on the ground, unable to move, barely clinging on to life. The group obviously, instantly grasped the gravity of this scene, and of course they called 911. Due to the difficult terrain in the area, a helicopter was called in, and Sailor was ultimately airlifted out of the wilderness, and folks, she somehow survived. Thank goodness. The actions of these three hikers, I'm gonna probably butcher their names here, but Nicole Jerrigan, Joe Filippiano, sorry, and Peter Bivea. Again, I probably got those last names wrong, but long story short, their actions ultimately saved Sailor's life. It's not even up for debate. If they hadn't found her, she probably would have died. And thank God they were there, and thank God they made all of the right decisions. Obviously, finding someone in a situation like that is just absolutely terrifying. And so they stayed with her for a long time. Eventually, she got rescued. And then finally, they returned home. They left the mountain, and they decided to just kind of kick back, try to relax, try to just decompress from this traumatic experience that they had just been through. They cracked a few beers, they tried to shake off the adrenaline, and when they did this, Joe opened his camera roll to kind of scroll through the photos that they'd taken that day. When he did this, a chilling discovery left these three hikers just shocked, because in the photos that they just casually snapped, just moments before Nicole had spotted the flash of red hair, well, you could actually see Sailor faintly in the background, barely visible, her red hair just kind of peeking out from the shadows. Sailor had been lying in that exact spot, stranded and helpless, since the previous night. She had been captured in their photos before they even knew that she was there. I can't even imagine what it must have felt like to view these photos and realize what was concealed in the background of them. I mean, could you guys imagine that? Just absolutely insane. Thank God they found her, and my heart goes out to those three hikers who saved Sailor's life. My heart goes out to Sailor as well, of course, and also to Brendan Vega and all his friends and family. Brendan's efforts to save Sailor were nothing short of heroic, and so please show him and the rest of the folks in this story some love in the comments. For our next story, I'm going to show you a video that is incredibly disturbing, not because of the actual video itself, but rather because of the events that happened literally right after this individual stopped recording. But before we get there, my give back call out for this week is going to be Santa Barbara County Search and Rescue. My understanding is that they assisted with the recovery of Brendan Vega and the rescue of Sailor. And so I've made a donation to them, and I'd encourage you to do the same. Their website, their details is linked in the description. Thank you so much to everyone who helps me give back.
This is a perfect visual of what we've been dealing with. This is the small one coming down. That's straight shot down. It's very dangerous stuff. There's bigger sections. I mean, all of a sudden, a whole side will come down. Whoa.
That video was recorded by Crystal Gonzalez on January 6th, 2023. She was climbing Mount Baldy in Southern California, and as she illustrated in the video, the conditions that day were very, very dangerous. In fact, going beyond just the video itself, the caption to this post on Facebook where she posted this video read, quote, "This stuff is dangerous. Beware hikers." Unlike the hikers in our previous story, Crystal was actually a very experienced hiker, and she'd even tackled Mount Baldy numerous times before. And also, unlike the previous story, from what I can tell, Crystal was in fact prepared to take on the treacherous winter terrain of Mount Baldy, both in her gear and in her decision making. As you heard in that video, on January 6th, Crystal made the safe decision to abandon her quest for the summit and to turn around and head back down the mountain to safety. And on this day, she made it. Crystal was a 56-year-old mother of 4 who had an immense passion for sharing her adventures on social media. She eventually became known by the nickname the Dancing Hiking Queen. 2 days after she recorded that video, 2 days after she turned around on Mount Baldy, Crystal decided to give it another shot. The date was now January 8th, 2023, which happens to be my birthday, which is kind of a side note, but while I may have been celebrating that day, for Crystal, January 8th would be a day where disaster would strike. Early in the morning, before sunrise even, Crystal was making her way back up Mount Baldy, and she pulled out her cell phone to record this video.
It's go time. Lots of people out today.
Crystal is seen smiling, she's listening to music, and she's just looking generally stoked on life as she ascended Mount Baldy. But only moments after Crystal recorded this video, the California Office of Emergency Services received an SOS message from a Garmin InReach, which declared that a hiker had taken a devastating fall on the mountain. In her last video, Crystal mentioned that there were lots of people hiking Mount Baldy that day. One of these other hikers must have seen Crystal fall and initiated that SOS message from their device in an effort to save her life. A helicopter was immediately dispatched to the coordinates of that SOS call. And by the way, if this isn't reason enough for you to carry something like a Garmin InReach, I don't know what is. I have a bunch of these devices linked to the description. But anyways, this helicopter was able to pretty quickly locate Crystal. And even though this happened fast, unfortunately by this time, Crystal was in critical condition. As fate would have it, Crystal must have slipped or tripped or something like that right after recording that final video. And it's estimated that she slid some 500 to 700 feet down into the famous Baldy Bowl. The helicopter came and they lowered down a medic, and ultimately, after the medic kind of assessed her condition, they decided that they needed to immediately airlift Crystal to the nearest hospital. And yet, despite this heroic rescue effort, Crystal didn't make it. She succumbed to her injuries, around the time that she was airlifted, before she was able to receive the medical attention necessary to save her life. And so that video that she made as she was hiking up Mount Baldy would end up being the last thing that she ever posted to social media. There's definitely not a happy ending to this story, but with that said, I do want to mention that a number of hikers who witnessed Crystal fall went, way out of their way, above and beyond in trying to save her life. In addition to hitting the SOS button to get, medics out there, these hikers supposedly surrounded Crystal and did pretty much everything they could to assist the medics. In fact, one of the medics that was on scene was quoted saying, "It was a terrible situation, but we were able to see some of the best of humanity where the bystanders were helping out." And so I applaud those hikers who risked their own lives to try and save the life of a stranger. And I also want to mention that once again, Crystal Gonzalez was an experienced hiker. I don't know the details of all the gear she had that fateful day, but from all the photos I've seen, she was known to carry the proper gear for winter hiking. I know that she had also summited Mount Whitney in the past, and so she had the experience, she had the gear. It appears to me that this is not the case of an unprepared, ill-equipped hiker making bad decisions and then dying as a result. And that is the case in a lot of the stories I cover on here, a lot of the stories you hear about hikers dying. I don't know why Crystal fell, but if you take anything away from this story, it's just that you should always keep your guard up, even if you know what you're doing and even if you're making all of the safe decisions. My heart goes out to Crystal, her children, and the rest of her friends and family. And once again, guys, please show some love for her in the comments section. For our next story, we're going to be visiting one of the most dangerous national parks in all of the United States. In fact, the very name of this national park is rife with danger because, of course, I'm talking about Death Valley National Park. If you made it this far into the video and you're not yet subscribed, please do that. And so with that said, in the summer of 2010, 3 tourists set out on what was supposed to be a day trip to the park, which holds the record for the hottest temperature ever recorded. That temperature reading was 134.1 degrees Fahrenheit, or 56.7 degrees Celsius, and it was recorded in July of 1913. July is the hottest month in Death Valley, the hottest place on earth, and it just so happens to be the exact month that Donna Cooper, her daughter Gina, and their friend Jenny Ling decided to visit Death Valley. The beginning of their trip was pleasant, if a bit uneventful. They visited the famous Scotty's Castle for a few hours. Donna bought a t-shirt there, and then the group got back into their Hyundai Ascent to return to their home in Nevada. Little did they know, they would not be making it home. While they were driving out of the national park, they noticed a sign for another famous Death Valley attraction known as the racetrack. They see this sign and they made a split-second decision, an impulsive but also seemingly harmless choice to detour. They turned and they headed for the racetrack, but eventually they realized that something was wrong. I want to take this moment to remind you that this was in 2010. Nowadays, we all just use Google Maps or Apple Maps on our phones to navigate. But back then, a lot of people, probably a lot of you guys watching this, a lot of people used dedicated GPS units to guide their road travel. And in remote places like Death Valley, these GPS units would often lead travelers astray. This is something that happens a lot more than you might realize. It happens so often, in fact, that there's literally a term called death by GPS. For stories where people were led astray by their GPS and then died as a result. So after they veered off the main road, Cooper pressed on through this desolate landscape, driving for miles in search of this elusive racetrack attraction. But as each dusty stretch of road blurred into the next, this famous landmark remained nowhere in sight. The group began to get frustrated, and eventually they just straight up admitted defeat and decided to turn back and to just head home. Yet, as they tried to retrace their steps, Death Valley's endless, identical terrain quickly betrayed them. Instead of finding their way back, they drove deeper and deeper into the barren wilderness, mile after disorienting mile, until an unsettling realization kicked in. The group realized that they were completely lost. However, despite this realization, there was no panic. There was no fear. Donna Cooper simply turned on her GPS, placing her faith in Nell, which was the loyal device that she had named and trusted without question. She was sure that her GPS, Nell, would steer them back to safety. But folks, this did not happen. Nell would end up betraying them. The GPS spiraled them deeper into the wilderness, guiding them in endless circles through this lifeless, brutal desert. Once again, mile after mile, they followed the device's misguided directions, only to be pulled further from any hint of civilization. Eventually, they just gave up on following the GPS entirely. By dusk, the group had traveled over 100 miles in hopeless confusion, their gas gauge now hovering on empty, and their drinking water supply nearly gone. And then, just as the final slivers of light faded, the car shuddered and fell silent. The clock struck 10 p.m., and Donna, Gina, and Jenny were left utterly stranded, alone in the hottest place on Earth. The three women now had no other option but to spend the night cramped inside of their car. And when the sun finally rose the following morning, their situation was looking incredibly grim. They were hungry, they were thirsty, and so they began to just kind of scour the barren landscape, desperately searching for any scrape of food, any trace of water, any sliver of hope to escape the unforgiving desert that was now holding them captive. They found a little bit, no water, they found a little bit of food, but not really much. And then later that morning, Gina insisted that they try to start the car again. This seemed kind of pointless. I mean, they were out of gas after all, what was going to happen? But at the same time, they didn't really have anything to lose from just trying it one more time. And so Donna slipped the key into the ignition. She turned it, bracing for silence. But then, against all odds, the car engine roared back to life. Maybe, just maybe, this miracle of the car turning back on would give them a fighting chance to survive. At the same time that all of this was going on, across the country, someone else was racing against the clock to save the stranded tourists. Donna's daughter, Sky, had felt an uneasy silence when her mother hadn't checked in with her via phone the night before. Sky, who was Donna's oldest daughter, was also thousands of miles away in the state of Florida, but she sensed that something was deeply wrong. Distance be damned, she was about to find out what the hell had happened to her mother. To do this, Sky resorted to searching through Donna's financial records, and she noticed that her last purchase had been made at Scotty's Castle in Death Valley National Park. And from here, it wasn't hard to surmise that the women were probably lost somewhere inside the park. And so Sky contacted the authorities in California, and the search for the missing tourists was on. With their car sputtering back to life, Donna, Gina, and Jenny didn't waste a single second. They knew that every single drop of gas was precious. And so they pushed onward, rolling down every hill in order to try to stretch their fuel as far as humanly possible. They didn't want to waste any gas. And then, in the shimmering distance, they saw what was basically an oasis. It was a patch of standing trees, which might not seem significant to you, but trees meant water, and water meant hope. If they could find some water, they knew they had a chance to survive. And so they aimed their car directly at this faint lifeline. But just as they approached, the car choked out again, and this time it died for good. There would not be any more miracles from the engine. They were completely out of gas this time for real, but their car had gotten them a lot closer to these trees and thus had gone a long ways in saving their life. The three women got out of their car. They packed up what little belongings they had, which wasn't much because, again, they were only supposed to be there for the day. And then they prepared to set out on foot towards this patch of trees. Thankfully, they weren't very far away at this point because a long trek in the scouring Death Valley heat would have been a certain death sentence. And if you don't believe me, go watch my video about a group known as the Death Valley Germans. So they're getting ready to make this short hike over to this patch of trees. But before the group walked away from their car, they scribbled a very ominous message into the dust on the back of it. It read, quote, "Help. Call police, please." Their message also included an arrow which pointed at the direction that the women would trek. And folks, trek they did. They pushed through the dangerous and brutal heat, and they eventually did reach this oasis of trees. Oh, and by the way, when they reached it, they found much more than they could have ever possibly hoped for. Actually, it wasn't just trees at all that they found. Hidden in these trees was a series of abandoned trailers, and inside the trailers, the women found food. It wasn't exactly ideal. Much of the food was expired and some of it was like visibly spoiled, but finding this food would obviously significantly increase their chances of survival. And then the women discovered a hose on the back of one of the trailers. They turned the knob for this hose, and with this came the realization that they had found exactly what they were looking for. Folks, water. They found water. When they turned the knob, water poured out of the hose. Now, this water was dirty and it was also hot. Again, this is Death Valley. And so it wasn't exactly a refreshing drink. But at this point, the women were so desperate to quench their thirst that they didn't even care about this. They now had food, they had water, and they even had the bonus of shelter with these trailers and some of the mattresses inside. But despite having all that stuff, the one thing that they didn't have was rescue. And thus, they settled down for another night in the desert, hoping that somebody, anybody, would find them before it was too late. By the morning of day 3, the search for the missing women was looking very grim. More often than not, being lost in Death Valley for even just a day, especially in the summer like this, is a death sentence, basically. And so on July 25th, as helicopter pilots Tyler Johns and Scott Steele searched from high above, their expectations of finding the women alive were basically zero. At this point, it wasn't even a rescue mission, it was a body recovery mission. But regardless, for 6 long hours, these pilots searched the scorching, desolate landscape from the sky. As their own fuel gauge dipped towards empty, they got ready to abandon the search altogether. You know, at this point, it just wasn't looking good. They'd been searching for so long, they had to call it at some point. But just as they turned to leave, something just felt wrong. It was a feeling they couldn't quite explain, and so against all logic, the pilots decided to take one final pass over the Saline Valley. As they were doing this, they spotted a seemingly abandoned car down below. And then, a bit further up the valley, they spotted a young woman desperately waving a yellow blanket. They obviously were going to investigate this, and so they landed, and they quickly realized that they had found Donna, Gina, and Jenny alive. With this miraculous discovery, gas, supplies, and a guide was brought in, and the women were actually able to drive themselves out of the park. I'm so thankful that they survived, and I want you to remember this photo if you ever plan to take a trip to a remote, unforgiving place like Death Valley. You don't want to end up like these women did. Make sure you have enough food, make sure you have enough water, and make sure you have the proper navigational tools to get you out of trouble if you find yourself in it. My heart goes out to Donna, Gina, and Jenny. I hope they're all doing well now, and I hope all of you stay safe out there on your adventures. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see everybody next week. If you're in the Denver, Colorado area, on Saturday, December 7th, 2024, I will be doing a live podcast with Backpacker Radio. I'm going to be talking about my experiences through hiking, various backpacking related topics, and I'll be sharing a brand new trail mystery that has not yet been covered on my channel. And so I would love to see you there. One more time, Denver, Colorado, December 7th, Saturday, December 7th. Details and tickets will be in the description.